The night was thick with silence, broken only by the faint trickle of water dripping down the crumbling walls of the Roman catacombs. In the year 1853, an Italian gravedigger named Alessandro reported that he had seen something he would never forget. He was tending to one of the lower burial chambers beneath the Basilica of San Clemente, a place where the tunnels stretched like veins under the eternal city. Carrying only a lantern, he descended into the stale darkness to retrieve human remains ordered for relocation by the clergy. The air was damp and heavy, filled with the smell of earth and decay. But then he heard it. A strange, wet sound, rhythmic, almost like the greedy slurping of someone drinking deeply. At first he thought a vagrant had made his way down into the tombs. But when Alessandro lifted his lantern toward the sound, what he saw caused him to scream so violently that his cry echoed up through the stone corridors and into the chapel above. He swore, until the day he died, that he saw a figure hunched over one of the ancient coffins. Its face was pale, the skin tight like parchment, but its mouth was buried against the corpse's remains. Alessandro described its teeth as long, glistening in the lantern's flame, and the eyes, wide, glassy, glowing faintly, as if catching fire from the lantern's glow. The thing lifted its head, lips dripping with thick, dark liquid, and stared directly at him before vanishing into the shadows. The church dismissed Alessandro's tale, branding him as delirious. Yet his hair, once dark, turned white within a year, and he refused to ever go underground again. Was it madness? Hallucination? Or had Alessandro truly witnessed one of the Eternal City's darkest secrets? That buried beneath Rome's splendor and piety, there lingers something more ancient, something far more sinister than anyone dares to admit. Before we continue down this haunted path through Rome's forgotten history, where blood rituals and whispered vampiric cults left their mark, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We bring you spine-chilling stories from history's darkest corners, forgotten horrors, and cursed legends, all told to keep you awake at night and make you wonder what shadows are watching. Hit that subscribe button and join us, because tonight's descent into Rome's blood-soaked past is only just beginning. Rome is known as the Eternal City, a place of emperors, gladiators, temples, and martyrs. But what is less spoken of is Rome's obsession with blood. From the arenas where thousands died for spectacle, to temples where sacrifices stained marble altars, to the whispered rumors of underground brotherhoods who drank blood as part of their forbidden rites, the city has always had a hunger. Some historians argue that the very concept of blood cults predates Christianity's rise within the empire, and perhaps even Rome itself. What Alessandro may have seen in those catacombs was not a lonely phantom, but the echo of something older, a lineage of rituals practiced for centuries. The Romans were practical people, yet they were also deeply superstitious. They believed in omens, in the restless spirits of the dead, and in the possibility that the boundary between the living and the underworld was thinner than one might imagine. Evidence found in various Roman texts, from Pliny to Suetonius, hints at secret sects who performed rituals involving blood consumption. Some were tied to fertility, others to healing, and some, whispered in hushed tones, to immortality. Blood was believed to contain a person's vital essence, and consuming it might transfer strength, vitality, or even a piece of the soul itself. Could these early rites have inspired the very vampire myths that later spread across Europe? The Colosseum itself was a theater of blood. Imagine tens of thousands of spectators cheering while gladiators, slaves, and criminals fought to the death. Rivers of blood flowed into the sand. There were accounts that spectators, particularly women of noble families, would rush to touch the gladiator's blood as it spilled, believing it to be an aphrodisiac, a charm of power. Some sources even claimed that fresh gladiator blood was drunk as a remedy for epilepsy. Is it so far-fetched then to imagine that darker sects may have taken this fascination further, pushing into something far more sinister, something vampiric? One story, preserved in fragments, speaks of the cult of Hecate. a secretive group said to have met in hidden chambers beneath Rome during the reign of Emperor Domitian. Their ceremonies involved moonlit gatherings, torches blazing in the dark, and the sacrifice of animals. But there are darker hints of human victims. Accounts suggest that initiates drank from chalices filled with blood, claiming it was the key to crossing into the shadow world. Witnesses disappeared, scribes erased references, and yet traces of this cult appear across inscriptions and graffiti buried in the ruins. Could these be the ancestors of the so-called Roman vampires? What makes the thought chilling is the city itself. Rome is a labyrinth of catacombs, aqueducts, and hidden temples, many of which remain sealed and unexplored to this day. Beneath the churches and palaces lies a forgotten maze where the dead were laid to rest in stacked rows, their skulls and bones pressed against each other in eternal silence. Yet whispers among locals persist, strange lights seen flickering in locked passageways, unearthly cries echoing in the stillness, shadows moving where no one should walk. Modern explorers report sudden drops in temperature, the feeling of being watched, and even the stench of fresh blood where none should exist. Alessandro's story was not unique. In the late 19th century, another priest in Trastevere supposedly encountered a figure in the catacombs, pale, emaciated, with long nails, crouched like an animal, gnawing on bones. The priest fled, refusing to ever speak of it in public. But his written journal, discovered decades later, described it with detail chillingly similar to vampire legends. The creature's hunger, its fixation on marrow and blood, its animal-like stare. Could it be that beneath the eternal city, something endured, a presence, a blood cult, or perhaps beings who had made themselves immortal by feasting on the essence of others? Rome's grandeur hides its shadows. Tourists see the fountains, the piazzas, the ruins glowing golden in the sun. But what if those ruins are not silent? What if, as Alessandro claimed, there are things still lurking, waiting, hidden in the dark arteries beneath the city? And so the question remains, are Rome's vampires just myths born of fear and superstition? Or are they remnants of a horrifying truth? A truth still buried in the blood-soaked soil of the eternal city. The tale of Alessandro's haunting encounter spread quietly through the back streets of Rome, whispered among priests and gravediggers, but never openly admitted by the church. Yet what he saw seemed to echo a truth embedded in Rome's history, that the eternal city has always had a dark obsession with blood. To understand the roots of the so-called Roman vampires, we must descend further into the rituals and legends of the empire itself, where sacrifice, secrecy, and superstition intertwined in ways more chilling than any ghost story. The Romans were not strangers to death. Their world was soaked in it, from the gladiatorial games to the wars that expanded their empire across continents. But more than the act of killing, it was the symbolic use of blood that fascinated them. Blood was seen as life, as essence, as a bridge between mortality and eternity. When a gladiator fell, the crowd erupted not only in the thrill of victory, but also in the belief that his lifeblood released power into the air, a power that could be captured, touched, or even consumed. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder recorded with both disdain and curiosity the practice of epileptics rushing into the arena to drink fresh gladiator blood, believing it cured their condition. Imagine the sand of the Colosseum, darkened with rivers of red, and citizens, dressed in fine robes, bending down to scoop life straight from a corpse. That act alone feels vampiric, doesn't it? But beyond these public spectacles lay secretive cults. Some were known: the cult of Mithras, the rites of Bacchus, and the worship of Hecate. Others were whispered, their names erased, but their deeds never entirely forgotten. Inscriptions uncovered in Ostia and Pompeii suggest the existence of brotherhoods who performed blood rites under the cover of night. Mithraic worship, for example, often involved imagery of a bull being slaughtered, its blood flowing into channels where initiates might stand beneath, bathing in the life force of the beast. But some accounts, though fragmented, hint that these ceremonies may not always have been limited to animals. Could the hunger for vitality have pushed some cults further, into darker practices where human blood was the key to their ritual ecstasy? The most disturbing accounts come from the margins of Roman literature, from satirists and moralists who denounced secret societies as dangerous. One such writer, Juvenal, mocked those who licked blood in their rites, though he stopped short of naming who exactly performed these acts. Was this exaggeration for poetic effect, or a glimpse into what Romans knew but rarely said aloud? Historians argue endlessly, but the imagery is too consistent across centuries to ignore. The act of blood drinking was real, and it left its stains on Rome's underground. Picture this. Beneath the city, beneath the basilicas that now shine with gold and marble, lie miles of catacombs dug into soft volcanic rock. These labyrinths were burial places, but also meeting grounds. Torches flickering against damp stone, shadows stretching like skeletal fingers, initiates chanting in Latin, pouring blood into chalices, whispering prayers to gods long forgotten. And among them, figures hooded, their faces hidden, raising those cups to their lips not in metaphor, but in thirst. Was it symbolic, or was it genuine hunger? Some legends say that in the reign of Emperor Domitian, a sect was discovered practicing what was described as necrosanguine rites, ceremonies that involved consuming the blood of both animals and, occasionally, criminals condemned to die. Domitian, paranoid and obsessed with rooting out threats, ordered their leaders executed, but others vanished into the dark. Were they wiped out? Or did they retreat deeper, into the veins of Rome's hidden catacombs, surviving in silence? Even today, visitors to those catacombs report things that chill the blood. Guides speak of sudden extinguished lights, whispers in Latin when no one else is near, and the cold sensation of breath against the skin though the tunnels are empty. One modern archaeologist described seeing shadows moving against the walls, though his lantern was still. Another spoke of finding bones gnawed as if by human teeth, though the remains were centuries old. These accounts are dismissed as imagination, yet when they echo Alessandro's terror, can we dismiss them so easily? But perhaps the most haunting suggestion comes from the figure of Lamia, a creature from Greco-Roman mythology. Lamia was said to be a woman cursed to hunger eternally for the flesh and blood of children, her body both human and monstrous. While her myth predates Rome, the Romans adopted and feared her, weaving her into their understanding of the night. Mothers warned their children, "Behave, or Lamia will come." Some scholars argue that Lamia was no mere story, but a memory of real people who lived by consuming blood, predators in human form. Could Lamia have been the mask through which the Romans understood their own hidden vampires? As we sift through the evidence, the line between superstition and reality blurs. Yes, the Romans wrote poetry, satire, and myth, but beneath the stories there lingers an unease. Too many references to blood rites. Too many hints of figures who lingered in the shadows, living off what others spilled. Too many testimonies from those who claim to have seen the impossible. And if vampires did exist in Rome, imagine what it would mean. A city built on conquest and sacrifice, where blood was poured daily onto altars and sand. What better place for such creatures to thrive? With endless victims from war, from slavery, from the games, Rome was an open vein, bleeding for centuries. If the legends are true, then vampires were not outsiders to Roman life. They were its natural children, born of its obsession with death, spectacle, and immortality. But perhaps the most disturbing thought is this: if they existed, where did they go? Did they die when the empire fell, buried beneath the rubble of time? Or do they still linger, hidden in the catacombs, waiting in the ruins for another careless Alessandro to stumble upon them? The Eternal City has earned its name. It never dies, only transforms. And perhaps so too do its vampires, still bound to the stones and shadows of Rome, still hungering, still watching. The further one digs into the shadows of Rome, the more unsettling the picture becomes. In the beginning, it was easy to dismiss vampiric whispers as allegory. metaphors for Rome's insatiable hunger for conquest, or for the cruelty of emperors who feasted on the misery of their people. But piece by piece, fragment by fragment, the line between symbolic and literal begins to fade. By the time the empire reached its height, stories of blood cults and night-stalking figures were no longer confined to myths. They seeped into the accounts of Rome's rulers, the most powerful men in the world, some of whom seemed to embrace the darkness more willingly than their subjects dared whisper. Take Emperor Caligula, for instance, a man whose cruelty is legendary. Historians such as Suetonius and Cassius Dio record his taste for the grotesque, from feasting beside corpses to relishing in executions as though they were theater. One passage describes how he drank warm blood taken from sacrificial victims, convinced it gave him vitality. While some dismiss this as exaggeration, Caligula's reign was filled with enough cruelty that such an act is not beyond belief.
Could it be that he was not just cruel, but a participant in the same rites whispered of in Rome's underground? A man who commanded life and death, dipping into the very essence of his victims, as though life itself could be swallowed. And then there was Caracalla, another emperor who presided over rivers of blood. Known for slaughtering thousands in Alexandria for daring to mock him, his rule dripped with brutality.
Some later chroniclers noted that his soldiers called him a creature of the night, one who never seemed to tire, who roamed even when the city slept. A fanciful insult, perhaps, or a faint memory of something far darker. But it is Elagabalus, the teenage emperor often called Rome's most decadent ruler, who offers the most disturbing echoes of vampiric myth. He was rumored to bathe in blood, drawn not just from animals, but from slaves sacrificed in his private rituals. Though historians debate the accuracy of these accounts, the theme is undeniable. Blood as a source of vitality, blood as an offering, blood as pleasure. Time and again, the empire's rulers returned to it. And if emperors embraced the practice, what might that say about the cults that operated in the shadows, emboldened by imperial favor? It is easy to imagine how these rumors gave rise to legends of immortality. Rome's elite were obsessed with outliving death. Philosophers wrote endlessly on how to cheat time. Alchemists mixed potions. And still, the simplest and most primal belief persisted, that to take another's blood was to borrow their strength. Could vampirism, as we understand it today, have been less a supernatural myth and more a practice born of ritual, cruelty, and obsession with eternal life? The archaeological evidence is equally unsettling. In excavations beneath Rome, bones have been found with unusual markings, not from burial, not from animals, but from deliberate gnawing. Some appear to have been drained, their marrow hollowed in ways inconsistent with natural decay. Scholars often avoid the word cannibalism, preferring ritual consumption, but the implications remain. At a site near Porta Maggiore, fragments of altars were uncovered depicting chalices and figures in hooded robes, alongside carvings of nocturnal creatures, bats, owls, and serpents. Were these simply decorative, or were they markers of cults that drank not wine, but blood? One inscription, faint and nearly erased, reads, "Sanguis est vita." Blood is life. It is a phrase that could have been written by Bram Stoker centuries later, but here it is, carved into Roman stone. What was it meant to consecrate? What secret gatherings once stood before that altar, whispering vows in the flicker of torchlight? Then there are the catacombs. Tourists who venture into them often return with stories, many of them eerily consistent. The sudden extinguishing of torches, the sensation of being followed, the appearance of pale figures retreating into the darkness. Priests once warned against wandering too far, not only for fear of getting lost, but because, as one medieval chronicler noted, the dead do not rest easy there, for some never died at all. Modern paranormal investigators claim to have captured unusual recordings in these tunnels, breathing when no one else is near, voices chanting in Latin. One recording allegedly contains a phrase repeated 3 times, "Nos vivimus in sanguine." We live in blood. Skeptics say it is distortion, nothing more. But to those who have walked those endless halls, with their walls lined by the bones of thousands, the words feel disturbingly possible. But perhaps the most chilling accounts come not from tourists or archaeologists, but from locals who live near the ruins. In neighborhoods surrounding the Colosseum and Palatine Hill, there are whispers of figures seen at night, moving between the ruins. Too tall, too pale, too silent. In the 19th century, travelers described beggars warning them not to walk alone in those areas after dusk, for the notturni, the night ones, would follow them. Descriptions vary, but certain details remain constant. The eyes glowing faintly in the dark, the unnatural stillness, as if the figure is waiting, the sudden disappearance when confronted. One priest in the 1800s wrote of hearing confession from a woman who claimed her husband had been followed by such a figure on the Appian Way. She described him returning home with a look of terror, refusing to speak of what he saw, only whispering that the figure smiled with teeth too sharp to be human. A week later, he was dead of sudden blood loss, though no wound could be found. The priest recorded the account in his private journal, never published until long after his death. And so the stories weave together, from emperors who bathed in blood to shadows that walk the ruins even now. It is not difficult to see why Rome, a city built on layers of death, might nurture legends of creatures that feed upon life itself. The vampires of Rome may not match the image we see in Gothic novels, but they emerge from a far older, far darker truth. Blood was currency, and those who craved immortality were willing to drink it. As you walk through Rome today, past its bustling piazzas and sunlit streets, the past seems almost distant. Yet beneath your feet are the catacombs, the ruins, the bones of millions. And if the whispers are true, perhaps not all of them rest. Perhaps some still hunger, their existence bound not to coffins, but to the very stones of the eternal city. And that is the most terrifying thought of all. What if the Roman vampires were not monsters of legend, but people, emperors, cultists, priests, whose obsession with blood allowed them to live on in ways we do not yet understand? What if even now, as you hear this story, their descendants or shadows are still walking, still watching, still waiting? Rome has always been a city of contradictions. By day, it is a living museum, drenched in light and history, its piazzas echoing with the laughter of tourists and the ringing of church bells. By night, however, it transforms. Shadows stretch across broken ruins, alleys grow silent, and the eternal city begins to whisper once again. Those whispers often speak of ghosts, but some claim that what stirs in the dark of Rome is not the restless dead, but something far older and far more alive. To understand the possibility, one must remember what Rome was built upon: conquest, sacrifice, ritual. Blood was everywhere in ancient Rome, spilled in the arenas, poured over altars, drained in sacrifices. The Colosseum alone consumed the lives of thousands every year, their suffering cheered on by citizens hungry for spectacle. That much blood does not vanish. It soaks into stone, into soil, into memory. Even the church, when it later tried to sanctify the city, could not wash away the stains. If vampiric cults were truly born anywhere, it would be here, in a place where blood was both entertainment and sacrament. But the disturbing truth is that these legends did not end with the fall of the empire. In fact, some argue they only grew stronger in the shadows. During the Middle Ages, Rome was riddled with secret societies, many claiming ancient lineage. One such group, sometimes called La Fratellanza Oscura, the Dark Brotherhood, was whispered to practice the rites of life through blood. Though little is written openly about them, fragments of church records mention their heresies, consuming human blood to prolong life, performing nocturnal rituals in abandoned temples, swearing eternal loyalty to the Lords of Night. One Vatican document from the 1600s, long hidden in the archives, contains testimony from a monk who claimed to infiltrate one such cult. He described gatherings beneath ruined baths, where candles flickered against walls carved with ancient Roman symbols. At the center was a chalice filled not with wine, but with thick, warm fluid. The initiates chanted as they drank, their eyes rolling back, as though intoxicated by something more potent than alcohol. When the monk attempted to leave, he was pursued for days by a pale figure, one he swore had no reflection in the water of a fountain where he sought refuge. His testimony ends abruptly. The last line reads simply, "They are everywhere." Stories like this might be dismissed as paranoia if they stood alone. But the chilling thing is that they do not. In every century since Rome's fall, there are accounts of pale strangers, of bodies discovered mysteriously drained, of noble families rumored to have hidden sinister secrets. One particularly persistent rumor surrounds the Orsini family, one of Rome's oldest dynasties. Their Renaissance palaces still stand, filled with grotesque statues and eerie symbols.
Some researchers believe that the Orsini were not only patrons of art, but keepers of darker traditions, hosting midnight gatherings where blood was drunk to maintain youth. Is it coincidence that portraits of certain Orsini lords seem oddly unchanged across decades? Or is it possible that their painters simply captured a truth no one dared admit aloud?
And then there are the modern accounts. Tourists speak of seeing strange figures on the Appian Way, pale men and women who vanish when approached. Some claim that in the Colosseum at night, you can hear screams that do not belong to ghosts, but to something feeding. One chilling story comes from 2012, when a group of university students conducting research in the catacombs near San Sebastiano reported hearing whispers in Latin. At first they thought it was other tourists, but as they went deeper, the voices followed, surrounding them. Their lights flickered out, one by one. When they finally escaped hours later, one of the students bore scratches down his back, yet swore that no one had touched him. In an interview later, one of the group said something that haunts him to this day. The voices were not speaking to each other. They were speaking to us. Some historians argue that these stories are fueled by Rome's atmosphere, the weight of history, the claustrophobic tunnels, the endless ruins. But others point out something far more unnerving, that legends of vampiric beings in Rome predate medieval Europe's vampire lore by centuries. Long before Dracula, long before Eastern European superstition, Rome already had tales of the Striges, night creatures who fed on human blood. The line between Strix and vampire is thin. Could it be that the vampire as we know it today was born not in the forests of Transylvania, but in the heart of Rome itself? And here is where the truly terrifying question emerges. What if they never left? If secret cults, noble families, and emperors once drank blood to sustain themselves, what prevents them from doing so now, hidden behind the veils of power, wealth, and secrecy? Rome is filled with ancient villas, palaces, and locked vaults no outsider has ever entered. Beneath the Vatican itself stretches miles of archives and tunnels, guarded more fiercely than gold. What rests in those shadows? Whose names have been erased? Whose faces never appeared in mirrors? In 2019, a night security guard working near the Colosseum gave an anonymous testimony to a journalist. He described seeing a man standing inside the arena long after closing, pale as moonlight, dressed in dark robes. When he approached to tell him to leave, the figure turned and smiled. "His teeth were wrong," the guard said. "Too long, too sharp." The man vanished into shadow without a sound. The guard refused to work there again. The story was buried, dismissed as nonsense. But it joins dozens of similar accounts. Shadows, smiles, whispers, figures that should not be there. And perhaps this is why the legend of Rome's vampires endures. Because even if one dismisses the ancient emperors, the cults, the Orsini whispers, the monk's testimony, even if one insists that all of it is exaggeration or symbolism, the sightings continue. People still see them, people still fear them, and people still die mysteriously in Rome, their bodies found drained of life, their cause of death recorded as inconclusive. So, ask yourself this. If vampires truly walked the world, where better to hide than Rome? A city where death is everywhere, where millions of bones already fill the catacombs, where the ancient and the modern blur together, and where the line between myth and history is as thin as parchment. Perhaps, when you next visit Rome, you will feel it, that sensation of being watched among the ruins. Perhaps you will walk the Appian Way and hear footsteps behind you, though no one is there. Perhaps you will glimpse a pale figure at the Colosseum after dark, smiling faintly as though it knows something you do not. And perhaps you will remember this story: the emperors who drank blood, the cults who chanted in shadows, the whispers in the catacombs, the pale aristocrats who never seemed to age, the guard who saw teeth too sharp to be human. Perhaps you will remember and wonder, what if the Roman vampires were real? What if they are still here? What if, even now, as you listen to this tale, one of them is listening too? Because in the eternal city, nothing truly dies, not even them.